Let's jump into Philippians. We are continuing our series, Philippians Part 3. This is chapter 127 through 211, titled Subversive, Selfless, and Upside Down, Why We Like Our Idea of Following Jesus, but struggle when the truth of what it means sets in. If you haven't been here any of the past few weeks, we've been in a series studying Philippians, and what I mean by that is I encourage you, if you're inspired by today's message, you can go on any podcast platform or YouTube and listen to any of the previous installments of this particular kind of line of consciousness. But we're going 10 to 15 verses at a time, really focusing on the broader picture of Philippians. Now, a little bit of backstory. The book of Philippians is written by the Apostle Paul around AD 60 to 62. It's written during his first imprisonment in Rome, which is very different than his second imprisonment. If you know his first imprisonment, he appeals to Caesar at in the end of the book of Acts, and is transported back to Rome that his case might be heard. Essentially, though, that place becomes really a formation seedbed, have you will, of the letters that we study today. Now, it's not to be confused with his second imprisonment. The first one is house arrest. The second one is right at really the rise of Nero's persecution, which historically would be one of the worst times to be a Christian, I would say, on the face of the planet. Essentially, it would be the time that he loses his life. What's interesting about the first imprisonment is his ability to convey positivity as well as his ability to talk about joy. If you've been here any of the last few weeks, you know that I've mentioned this, that it's mentioned over 12 times in the book of Philippians, joy in your circumstance, in your trials, in all of these things. And this is written by somebody who's literally under house arrest in Rome. So it's a really beautiful book in terms of what I would say, understanding God through the lens of wider than what your circumstance is trying to tell you who God is. Meaning, my circumstances are not the best, therefore God obviously is terrible. Paul writes this book, circumstances are not necessarily the best, and boy is he full of hope, faith, and joy. Now, he writes this letter to the church in Philippi. You can also research how that church is established. That takes place in Acts. He stops in a place called Macedonia. Historically, what we see is he meets three people, a wealthy woman business owner, as well as a formerly demon-possessed slave girl, as well as a Roman jailer. And those are kind of the strategy of let's build the church with these three, which is really how all strategy in church planning in America typically works. Like, get me a demon-possessed person, a wealthy female business owner, and somebody who works at a jail, and we'll really get this thing popping, right? And so essentially this becomes the formation of this first church, but ultimately it's a book that really demonstrates God uniting people across the spectrum. Why this is important is because Philippi is a Roman colony or a Roman trade outpost as well, in which a lot of different types of people come through. So this church is really made up in a very diverse way. And as you'll see today, the letter really insinuates not just a personal relationship with God, but a communal relationship with kingdom work around us. So we're going to jump into the text today. Once again, we are in Philippians 1:27. 2 through 11, it says this: "Only conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or remain absent, I will hear that you are standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel." I love this because essentially what we see about standing firm is it really starts with this understanding of unity. Meaning unite in mind, unite in spirit, unite in the gospel. And I would even say this, I was a little bit convicted, have you will, as I was writing this sermon, because so much of our church, if you've been here, has been flavored with the language of rhythm, routine, habits, disciplines, these things that really reform us in the image of God, that sanctify the mind, the heart, the will, the emotions. But really the text today, you're actually going to notice something that I feel like is very interesting. And it's that Paul writes a letter, and it's not really challenging them into as much a deeper life in God as much as it is challenging them into a deeper life alongside others in God. And it's interesting because I feel like in the American construct today, even our church, I can challenge a lot of people on the personal relationship, which I think is absolutely important. But there's a level of what he talks about today that really insinuates the need for corporate relationship, meaning the kingdom-minded people in life that I unite to, that I'm in one spirit with. And sadly, in our culture and climate today, like, we love to cherry pick the people we're united to, the people that we're in one spirit with, the people that we really want to be around. That's who I can be united with. But ultimately, he writes to a people of such broad diversity and spectrum of where they come from, and invites them into a kingdom that should transcend all of what their identity truly is. Continuing on, it says this, verse 28, in no way alarmed by your opponent, which is a sign of destruction for them, but of salvation for you, and that too from God. For to you it has been granted for Christ's sake, not only to believe, but to suffer. This is great news, right? It's like funny, we love to believe, and then he follows it up. He's like, guys, guess what? God's graced you. You get to believe in him, and you get to suffer for him. Like, can we get a double amen there? No, we're like, I'll amen that first belief part, but I don't really want to amen that second suffering part, right? Continuing on, it says this. It says, verse 30, experiencing the same conflict which you saw in me. I love that line because it's like when we read that, we're like, oh, experiencing the you guys, we get to believe and we get to suffer. Just as you've seen me do, you get to do. There's another passage of scripture where Paul writes about like all the things that he's walked through. It's like, I've been beaten by rods. People tried to stone me to death, shipwrecked multiple times, kind of burrowed out of a hole in the wall through a basket so I didn't get killed. It's like, hey guys, isn't it sick we all get to do this together? No, it's not. Anyway, it says this. Therefore, if there's any encouragement of Christ, if there is any consolation of love, if there is any fellowship of the Spirit, if any affection and compassion, notice their joy popping up again, make my joy complete by being of the same mind. Notice this. We're talking about a corporate mindset. By being of the same mind, maintaining the same love, united in spirit, intent on one purpose. Do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility of mind, regard one another as more important than yourselves. Notice when we're talking about selfishness and conceit, it's literally measured by how we interact and dispense love and grace on others. Meaning, we could sit here and be like, I'm not a selfish person, right? But it's not measured by what you say about your life. It's measured by the lives of those who are around your life and what they say about your life, right? So with that, continuing on, he goes even deeper. Do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility of mind, regard one another as more important than yourselves. Do not merely look out for your own personal interests, but also the interests of others. Once again, the emphasis on others. Have this attitude in yourselves, which was also in Christ Jesus, who, although he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to grasp, but he emptied himself. I'm going to do a deep dive on these verses from 6 through 8, but I love the first thing it says. It's like when we talk about God's progression here, the first thing it says is he could have grasped to be equal with his Father, but he didn't. And what did that mean? He emptied himself. Now, I say this because this is a rather pointed thing, but it just is what it is in our country. I think we love godliness as long as it props ourselves, our feelings, our emotions, and our intellect up as a deity, have you will. Meaning, I serve God so that I can become the God of my own domain, not selfless, surrendered, not releasing and emptying myself. Meaning, I should say this, when we come to God, it's not like, yeah, I accepted Jesus, it's been great. It should be, I accepted him, and I have started a process of emptying myself of anything not of him. Meaning that journey of following Jesus is not so much what he adds to our life in the beginning as what he removes from our life in the beginning. Continuing on, it says this, taking the form of a bondservant. I encourage you, if you were not here for week 1, that language is incredible. Paul's really the only apostle that we see use it. He uses it directly to open 3 books, 3 of his epistles, as well as peppers it in throughout it. A bondservant is every 6 years. If you were an indentured slave in the Hebrew, on the 7th year, you are mandated by law to go free. right? So you could have a slave or a servant that was a Hebrew, one of the 12 tribes, for 6 years, but every 7 year you would have to release him. A bondservant is on that 7th year. If your master came to you and said, hey, you can go free now, you literally would make a choice to say, actually, I don't want to be free. I'd rather be a slave in your house the rest of my life. Which, we're all Americans here. We're like, who would ever make that decision? Like, hey, you're free now. It's like, no, actually, I'm good. I want to be a slave. Right? And actually, it's even deeper. It says that they would take a hammer and an owl, take their ear, and nail it to the doorpost of their master's house. And that scar would be a symbol. They're a bondservant. It's like, hey, would you rather be free, or would you rather be a slave and nail your ear to a door? Right? It's like, we love like the comfy, cool parts of the Bible, and then it's like you read those, you're like, Continuing on, Paul describing himself. This is Jesus, took on the form of a bondservant, being made in the likeness of man, being found in appearance as man, humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. There's a redundancy there I'm going to spend time on as well, right? He humbled himself to death, even death on a cross. We already know how he died. Why are we talking like even death on a cross? Yes, we know he died on a cross. This church, Philippi, knows he's died on the cross. Why is that redundancy there? We'll spend time on that here in a second. Verse 9, for this reason also God highly exalted him, bestowed on him the name which is above every name. So at the name of Jesus, every knee will bow, and all those in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue will confess that Christ Jesus is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. I want to ask you a question as we kind of get into the nitty-gritty of this passage. When's the last time you had an idea of how something would go, and it didn't go the way that you thought? Weirdly, it either turned out better than you thought, or it just, you had an idea that it would be really good, and then it turned out terrible. Or, there's a special category that I'm about to talk about. You had an idea of how something was going to go, and it weirdly turned out better than you thought and worse. Now, I bring that up because I think early on in faith what happens is we start walking with God, and there's an awareness. This is really nice. I feel peace. I feel love. I feel grace. I feel God's nearness. But then, like I said, there's the belief and the empty. There's an awareness that, yes, I know these things, but also my life is kind of getting harder. I'm uncovering selfishness. I'm uncovering a level of greed or using people or control, or I'm uncovering awareness of anger or bitterness. And it's like, yes, life is both simultaneously great because I know that there's a God in heaven, but also simultaneously like, dude, can you stop? Because it feels like the closer I get, the more I'm reminded how far away I really am. It can be both good and brutal. And what I mean by that is, I'll tell you a brief story. Every year, we've had a habit since before we planted this church, me and my wife, is we take July off for obvious reasons. It's hot. And what I mean by that is we don't travel during holidays. Typically during holidays, church season is a little bit, like, we got a lot going on. And so we're from Michigan originally. That's where we were met and married. I was born in SoCal. And all of our family's still back there. So in July, for July 4th, we go back. We spend usually 10 to 14 days with our family, and then we do a family trip every year. Now, when we started these trips, our first trip, we didn't have any kids. Second trip, my wife was pregnant with our first, which was a little gnarly because we did Pacific Northwest, Oregon coast, and the windy roads. Man, she was throwing up all the time, and I was reminded how selfish I am. Why are we stopping? Because I'm throwing up. Well, just throw up in the car. Like, no, like, stop being a prick. You're right. Third trip was actually, we had a 6-month-old, and then I want to talk, which is a whole other thing. And then the trip I want to talk about was actually 2 trips ago, which our 6-month-old was now 1.5. And my wife was pregnant with our second. So essentially, we had just finished spending time in Michigan, and I had been hyped up for this trip, like, for a while, and it was an Alaska cruise. And I was really excited, and so essentially, we flew from Michigan to San Francisco, and we were going to board our ship. We had like a day or two, and we left Michigan and we go to San Francisco, and my daughter just doesn't adjust to time change very well. And now she's like almost 3. You would think, let's grow in this area. So every day, dude, we land, and my daughter's waking up at 4 a.m. And then the biggest thing is my wife gets a crazy sinus infection. And so much, she's extremely sick, she's pregnant, my daughter's not sleeping. We're starting vacation off sick. Thank you guys. I'm in my mind, I've been looking forward to Alaska. I'm 90 years old. No, I'm sorry. And so we start off the trip, and then we get on the boat. And when we get on the boat, the room's real tight. And then I find out, the week before we get on the boat, I got such a bone to pick with cruise ships. I got a 1.5-year-old. They low-key tell me, they're like, yo, you didn't pay for your kid. I'm like, yeah, because she's tiny. They're like, yeah, she's the same price as you. I had to turn around. You're telling me my 1.5-year-old is the same price as a 34-year-old? Yes. She's going to eat applesauce, my man. So I'm already my wife's sick, my wife's pregnant, my kid's not sleeping, I'm paying for an adult fare, I'm in this tiny room. My kid then gets sick, I then get sick. The first 3 days, we're all sick, and I'm like, what are we doing here? Right? We go on this cruise, and we're like, all right, finally we get through the sickness, and it's all right, we stop in the towns. Towns are great, it's fun, but the only problem is it's Alaska cruises are for 60, 70-year-olds. So you're trying to meet friends, and there ain't no dang kids there. You walk around, kid wakes up at 4 a.m. What do we do? Just walk laps. Because you can't be on the deck because it's freezing. It's 40 degrees. My kid's got so I'm just this is not going how I thought it would go. And I remember after about a week, we've stopped in the towns, done all the things, but after about a week, I'm just man, this is not what I thought. And then essentially I remember, though, when I get home, it has become some of the fondest memories. Because on our way back, I'll never forget one day where we all went up on the deck, and we were going through a school of whales, literally all around us. Whales and dolphins. And then my daughter, because she wouldn't sleep, she would go to bed really early, 5:30, 6 o'clock, and I would end up going up on the top deck into a whole glass room. And I would just study and pray and read my word. And I would just be surrounded by untouched nature, just sailing along this coastline. And Alaska became this fond memory that in the moment was what are we doing? But ultimately it became the best, kind of the worst as well. See, the irony of it all is in some seasons, following Jesus feels as if it is the very best decision you have ever made. You feel presence, love, nearness, peace. You have purpose in your everyday life. It is the fullness of joy. There's also a weirdness that in that very same season, it can feel kind of like the worst. Why? Because every step towards holiness is a step away from selfishness. Every step toward being Christ-like, a step away from the pursuit of man that I feel maybe is the sum total of my personhood. Every time I worship, an invitation for him to remove anything else that I may be worshiping contrary. The complexity of Christ is that we can both be deep in love while in seasons we are not loving at all. We see his beauty all around us, yet even struggle to see what ways he's made us beautiful in our own way. Truly a life that embraces God and follows him all of our days is one that will first have to come to grips with the life you imagine isn't always the life he'll produce. And sadly, I feel like in the church, what's happened oftentimes is we come in so hardline with this is what God is obviously going to produce. And ultimately, what is that? The awareness that I want to believe in God but be full of my own plans. I want to believe in God but be full of my own opinions. Believe in God but be full of my own carnal desires. Believe in God but be full of idolatry. Believe in God and be fully focused on superficiality or materialism. And what happens? No, when we believe in God, we are invited to empty ourselves out that God might fill. So today what I want to do is spend some time talking about how to stay the course when becoming like Jesus is way harder than you thought. How do you stay the course when becoming like Jesus is way harder than you thought. Because ultimately there will come a day in which you realize that that crown in some seasons feels like an actual crown, and in others actually feels like that crown of thorns. So with that, like I said, how do we stay the course when becoming like Jesus becomes harder than you thought? Number one is this: the gospel should change how you view resistance. Stand firm. Salvation starts as a beautiful invitation to sanctification before it becomes subversive to the whole of your personhood. God forms you differently than you would form yourself. God uses what we would avoid or skip to produce what we could have never built or dreamed, almost always at the cost of self. Sometimes the things you want God to get you out of is the very things he's using to get Christ deeper into you. The way of Jesus is downward mobility in a world obsessed with upward mobility. We go low to climb high. I told you I was saving verse 8 because the redundancy speaks a little bit to the narrative we're trying to produce today. It says that he took on death, even death on a cross. We know that. We know that he took on death on a cross. Why is there delineation? And it's interesting because as I've been processing this piece, I feel like for me, it's one thing for us to say, die to self. It's another thing to embrace the very thing we want absolutely nothing to do with, and we would classify as the worst thing happening to us, and follow God through it. What do I mean by that? We've kind of sanctified what crucifixion is because we understand the narrative, but actually placing yourself back in that day and time, crucifixion was the most brutal, oppressive tactic that the Roman government used on enemies of the state. Meaning that really it was despised, it was vile, it was a terrible way to die, the worst way to die. So when Paul delineates, he's saying, he embraced death, but not just any death, the worst death you could fathom. Now, there's a redemptive arc that we see in this. The worst death becomes the defining moment of life for all of us. What am I trying to get at? Let's look at some historical, if you look at like the rebellion in Paris, right, in the early, I think late 1600s, early 1700s, there was a method of execution invented called the guillotine. We're all probably semi-familiar with the guillotine. Could you imagine if a prophet or a saint came about in that day and ultimately was talking about all of these great things and then was like, man, I'm going to go to death on the guillotine, and let's just trust that God is going to redeem the guillotine, right? And not only that, let's build a guillotine on our stage and let's say, thank you for the guillotine. Doesn't make any sense, right? This is why Paul's creating delineation, because everybody knows about Rome and crucifixion, and it's like, okay, even we're kind of like God, yeah, I'll die for you. What's the cross that maybe you're like, that might be a step too far? Let's Americanize and modernize this, right? The electric chair, something that 1900s was like a fascinating thing that America did. Could you imagine if somebody came on the scene that was like a pastor or somebody who was an incredible orator and you could tell walked with God and had power from heaven, and he was like, listen guys, I'm going to die on the electric chair, and when I do, don't worry, God's going to redeem that electric chair. Let's recreate an electric chair in church. Let's wear electric chair things here. Let's tattoo electric chairs. Be like, my God conquered that, right? No, you'd be like, that's weird. Place yourself in that first century Roman colony. That's the context. He died for you. Oh, and don't forget how he died. Death on a cross. Isn't it interesting that he almost paints this light, that there's a death that we have that, yeah, I can die to that. But can you die to that level? I can die to, but can you die to this level that Jesus died for, and trust that there's a redeeming level that God can bring about to your life as well? Sometimes the thing you want to get out of is the very thing he's using to get Christ deeper inside of you. See, your resistance is most likely something God maybe wants to redeem. There's a redemptive quality in the broken, hurting, excruciating seasons that we think are the worst, but somehow God can turn for his best purposes. Think about what we remember a cross for right now. That's why the Passion of the Christ blew up, because the reenactment of it, the almost grotesque nature of it, the R rating when I was 12 going to see it, right? Why? Because when you see what we've worshiped and what we think is victory, and you realize what it actually was and what God redeemed and resurrected, what is it that maybe you're looking and saying, God, I don't know if you could redeem or resurrect. I don't know if I can pay that cost. I don't know if that's something that you truly can do. That is why he said, even death on a cross, that he became exalted from. Second thing I have for you today is this. The gospel should change how you view and interact with people. Stand together. We clothe ourselves with selflessness, humility, and a commitment to unity. And that's what preserves my faith's fragility on its journey to maturity. Maturity is measured by how little life has to revolve around you. Knowing more about Jesus isn't the goal. Becoming more like Jesus is. Maturity in God is almost always measured in my humility, selflessness, and unity to the gospel and kingdom that weeds out the pride of self-centered and self-preserving salvation. I think that's one of the hardest things when you come in contact with people nowadays who we love the idea of believing in God and one day getting to heaven, but like when we really boil it down, it's more self-serving and self-preserving than it is sanctification. It's a lot more like, yeah, God, like do great things with my life, but also don't do anything difficult with it either. Don't make me take hard tests. Don't reveal the layers of my humanity that are opposite to what you've created me to walk in. See, what I'm really trying to say is this is what the beauty of maturity does, is it doesn't become measured by what you tell people. This is my favorite part of the entire passage, is if you notice, it's like, be selfless. When you're in community, be selfless. When you're around people, make sure that you're surrendered. Be obedient. Essentially, what is it saying? Hey, you may be able to gaslight yourself and be like, I'm selfless. But when you're in community, that mug gets assessed quick. When you're around people consistently that can look at your character, you can't prop yourself up in your mind. See, what am I trying to say? I think within the duplicity of wanting to pursue God, but kind of do it in our own inward way and not really be connected to anyone, anything, any community, any depth. Like I kind of just like treat church or treat God or treat all these things as it's like my own journey because everybody else gets it wrong. I'm the one who gets it right all the time. It's like, sounds really selfless. Actually sounds really self-preserving. You know, I have a theory, have you will, of, I was just processing this with just a few guys, but just, I have this theory about like midlife crises with guys as it pertains to just, your whole life becomes about what you can build, how much money you can make, how comfortable you can make your life, how in control you can have your surroundings, and you build that kingdom, and then you sit on the throne and realize, I'm empty. And what do? You blow it all up trying to find something to feel. See, when we partner with building God's kingdom instead of our kingdom, it's not chasing feeling, it's chasing purpose. It's not changing, it's changing what the measure of success is from a dollar amount or from a square footage of a house or from my kids went to this school to what have I done to redeem fallen creation? How have I lived in a selfless way that has led others to salvation? See, purpose starts to take on new meaning. And if you notice, the purpose isn't everybody quit your jobs and only be professional full-time ministry Christians. It's rather, would you be somebody that would allow God into your everyday life in such a way that it would impact every person that your everyday life comes in contact with? When we talk about fighting alongside each other, this is what purpose does, is getting close to others, allowing people in, locking arms with like-minded people, being in kingdom-minded community. As a diehard, I don't fluctuate on. If you notice, the entire narrative here is do it in community, do it to others, do it with people around you. We love to cherry pick those people And it's easy if you cherry pick every person that you interact with. Of course you can develop, but man, when you have to get around people who voted differently than you, have a different socioeconomic class as you, have a different skin color than you, have a different upbringing than you. What am I really trying to get at? The more you can get around people who are the opposite of you, the faster you can find out about who you truly are. Because anybody can be what they think they are around people they like, but you find out who you really are around the people you don't necessarily see eye to eye with. I'll say this, I grew up playing football, and sadly, senior year rolled around and I just couldn't make it in the NFL. It's funny, like I remember like joking with guys in like high school, I'm like, yeah, anybody who wouldn't let their kids play football is like just insane, right? And then I like grow up, I've got a son now, I'm like, yeah, it's okay if you don't play football, like it's fine. Because literally, I remember that the hardest and the worst injuries I ever had in football, ready for this, were all from my teammates. I'll never forget, the hardest I've ever been hit in football, I was playing in a game, they ran a toss play, which means they pitched it to the running back. I was playing corner. I went to fit this guy up. I put my helmet across his chest. I mean, perfect fill, and a nose guard on my team, who was my friend, had been running full speed and did the same thing, and we went helmet to helmet. I remember like looking up at the stars, and it was like just spinning. It's like Interstellar, 7 years was passing, right? And I remember like standing up, and it's like you're staggering. My friend immediately pops up. He's like, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Obviously." Like stagger to the huddle, wake up the next day, still have a headache, like definitely had a concussion. Who cares? Suck it up. We won the game. I like straight up, like I'll never forget making a tackle, dude. My teammate blows into my finger. It's cold out, just shreds my nail off, blood everywhere. I was like, oh, this is terrible. My best friend was the quarterback. I run around in the game. He throws just an absolute dirt rocket. I try to dive and catch it. My chin strap flips in my mouth, hits me in the teeth, knocks my teeth out. Like, it wasn't my opponents ever. It was my teammates. And in that place, I had a choice. Am I focused on the win or the pain? Am I focused on what the team is trying to accomplish or the acute awareness of what's happened and wronged me on that team? What am I really trying to say? I can stand on this stage with 10 toes down and tell you I've experienced everything you can experience in the church world as it pertains to people hurting you, people speaking negative about you, people doing fill in the blank. I've had it. Doesn't change my perspective of the gospel. Doesn't change my perspective of God's goodness. Doesn't change my passion and zeal to build the kingdom. Sadly, the depth of how that reaches is when people stop affecting you. I'm not saying that you completely disassociate, but holy cow, what would it look like to be so heavenly minded that the things that happen on earth are things that you look at as, that's the fallen world. What am I trying to say? I challenge us, right? Paul is so great because in this narrative, he's moving from suffering to selflessness, talking about being one mind with others. Do you think Paul needed to be in one mind with randoms? Here's a better question. Do you think Jesus needed 12 disciples? Do you think Jesus needed anyone? What is it modeling? We need people on the journey alongside us who differ from us, who ask great questions, who probe deep. Man, life would be so boring if you just created your own colony of carbon-copied people. The kingdom is the mosaic beauty of all nations, tribes, and peoples coming together to redeem what's fallen. The last point I have for you today is this. Number 3, the gospel should change your view of greatness in life and the world. Stoop low. Because the faster you can get upside down, the quicker you can find the right side up. As time goes on, we tend to fight God at every turn in the journey of faith because we like to profess faith, but don't really love the process of what that faith actually does to our souls. If greatness is only about me and doesn't have a we, it's going to feel empty. Does the shape of your life look anything like the shape of his? Does it leave an impact on others as his did? I told you I was going to go through this progression, chapters 2, verses 6 through 8. I want you to notice Paul breaks down Jesus' ministry. I focused on the end and I focused on the beginning, but let's kind of do this deeper one as we close out here. right? It starts with this equality with God is not something that he grasped for. Meaning, I'm not in this to make myself great. I'm not in this to become the deity that you want me to be. If you remember kind of the shifting currents behind the scenes is everybody's wanting Jesus to become king and overthrow Rome. And he's like, I'm not here for that. So equality with God is not something he grasps. He makes himself nothing, defines him as a bondservant, humbles himself, practices obedience, embraces death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God exalted him with a name above every name. I want to say this to you frankly today. We as people, we love the exalted. But do we embrace making ourselves nothing? Do we embrace the bondservant? Do we embrace humility? Do we embrace staying obedient even in suffering and death? Do we embrace death? Do we embrace death even on the cross? The most excruciating death that he could have had. Will we stay the course? Because ultimately, if we do, there's an exaltation. What is that exaltation? I was on my walk this morning. Do you know my rhythms? I do a prayer walk. It's the same route on Sundays at like 6 a.m. And I was actually convicted today. I prayed with the team a little bit before this. I think so much of ministry and pastoring is praying for quantifiable reality to take place. Meaning, God, I pray today that there would be hundreds of people and people getting saved and just awesome service. And I felt like today the Lord challenged me. He said, Micah, I want you to just pray, my kingdom come and my will be done. And the awareness that when that happens profoundly, you would be able to sense it. And it was interesting because I think as time goes on, when we talk about exaltation, when I invite you into this, like, hey, if you stay the path, like as Jesus was raised up and exalted, so there is exaltation for glory for us it's not what your mind probably is thinking. What it is you're in a moment and you literally are tasting heaven. You're around brokenness and darkness, but you're whole and you feel a flame. See, what am I getting at? We like to define what God should be doing. But that's you being God. What if I told you, actually get so close that you don't even seek to define anything other than God? Have I been close to you today? Have I been close to you this week? Have I been selfless for the world around me? Have I been a conduit of your gospel? Have I stood firm in obedience, even obedience in the face of suffering? Have I honored you? See, these things are a little deeper than, God, I pray that you would use my social media platform to have 10,000 organic engagement in 36 seconds. Right? We love to create what we think God is doing, but ultimately, I can tell you this, in my life, I could have never imagined what this church would become in 4 years. We moved here 5 years ago, almost in about 2 weeks. 5 years ago, we knew 2 people in the state. I could not imagine what God would do in a short amount of time, but the process wasn't, God, would you make this? It was, God, I'm going to be close to you. We love the exalted, but what about the empty yourself? What about the become a servant? What about the humble yourself? What about the stay obedient? What about the die to yourself? See, we tend to believe we can get resurrection without crucifixion, exaltation, without selflessness and humility. We like a crown. We don't like a cross. Subversive, selfless, upside down. For we love our idea of following Jesus until the reality of following Jesus starts interfering with your life. Allow it to interfere with your life. Allow it to run its course in your life, and you might find that you find true life. Would you stand to your feet today?